I'm big on workflows and I'm big on building and automating systems. As soon as we book them in Airtable, that's a trigger for an automation via Zapier and Airtable automations. So we can handpick exactly. It's not like, hey, let's book this podcast guest and hope it resonates with our audience. No, no, no. We know exactly based on different demographic materials and their background, if or if not, they're going to resonate with our.
Today, we're joined by Stetson Stallworth. Stetson is the Director of Guest Relations for Brandon Turner's A Better Life podcast.
People are more likely to come on podcasts when they have something new coming out. Yeah, so we are early on in our monetization. Why that's kind of been on the back burner is a couple reasons. Not even 50%, probably 30 or 40% have come from this. But the other, 60 to 70% have just come from Brandon's friends. It's come from the relationships that he has built over the years.
In today's episode, we talked about how Stetson landed the job with Brandon Turner through sending out Wheatie boxes. We talked about the process and the operations of how a top successful podcast would have looked like. And we also talked about the different principles and goals he has set for his own life. Welcome to my conversation with Stetson.
Before I was doing some research, I searched your name on YouTube, and the first video that popped up was like Stetson Stallworth highlight 2013. It was like 4 minutes of gameplay of just like you breaking through walls, you breaking through crowds. Like how would you describe like the Stetson when he was like 14?
Dude, that's funny, man. I gotta do an audit of my of my YouTube and Google search. That's funny you found that. Yeah, basically, so I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, and my entire life, all I wanted to do was play college football. That was my entire goal. My dad played college football. That was what I wanted to do. And so I went to a school here in Vegas called Bishop Gorman. And if anybody out there knows anything about Bishop Gorman, they are one of the best high school football teams in the country. This year, they actually won a nice national championship. I have a national championship ring from my junior year. I had this dream of playing college football. My senior year, I wasn't going to play there at Gorman. I said, if I want to play, I need to go somewhere else. So my parents legally disowned me. I became a ward of the court for 15 minutes, and my grandma legally adopted me all 2 months before my 18th birthday, all just so I could then move to Arizona, move to a different state, live with my grandma, and play football at a new high school where my uncle was the head coach. And I ended up, I was very blessed, had a good season, and then ended up playing Division II and Division III football. Had an incredible time in college, learned a ton, shaped me, and all that. But all that being said, yeah, football has taken me a lot of places, made me do a lot of unorthodox things, but it's also made me the man I am, and I'm pretty damn proud of who that is. So
just like the idea of playing college sports or like going to one of the most elite like football high schools that are known for their football teams. I think that kind of ties back to a quote that you've been saying a lot. Anything in life worth doing, it's worth overdoing. Like, can you maybe tell me like how do you kind of translate this energy into your life today?
Normally, when you need a new job, what do? You go on Indeed, you go on LinkedIn, you apply for jobs, or you start talking to people, start asking for jobs, or you go to job fairs, whatever it is. So a little bit of my story. So to pick up where we left off, I played 4 years of college football. I ended up at a school called Cal Lutheran in Thousand Oaks, California. And I played my last season in 2019, was set to graduate in May of 2020. When I did that, February, March of 2020, if you remember, this little thing called COVID started happening and the world started getting weird. And so all of our classes went online, and I had a couple internships lined up in LA, in Los Angeles, and they got canceled. So I kind of said, you know what? It doesn't make sense to live in California. So I moved home to Vegas. And I said, how can I use this time? And so what I did was I fast-tracked my master's. I did my master's online in 9 months. Meanwhile, the only job I could get was mucking horse stalls. So during that time, I wanted to work in sports and entertainment, but nobody was hiring, especially in sports and entertainment. Just a good cover letter or a good resume isn't going to help. So what I did is I had this idea. I took a Wheaties box, like an actual like physical cereal box, and I made a resume that looked like a Wheaties box, 4 sides of it, and I pasted it on the Wheaties boxes, and I sent those out all over the country. I drove all over Southern California, all over Las Vegas, handing these things out, and all they were, it was, like I said, it was my resume, but it was a way to stand out. It was like a literal physical object that was fairly big, and I was broke at the time, and it cost
Mm-hmm.
about like $18 to send each one. So, I spent a lot of money sending those things across the country, but also anytime I could drive one to somewhere, I would. And so, anyway, that's an example of something that I wanted a job, but I am pretty proud of the fact that I realized and took action on overdoing it. And ultimately, that's what led me to get my current job with Brandon Turner, who is the host of our podcast, A Better Life with Brandon Turner, former host of the world's largest real estate podcast, Bigger Pockets. Basically, how that happened was I sent him a Wheaties box and with a note that just said, "Hey, I want to work for you." And he hit me back and just said, "Hey, this is really cool. Let's stay in touch." Yada yada. Anyway, fast forward about 6 months. I was working for a rodeo at the time. So after scooping horse poop, I got a decent job selling sponsorships for the National Finals Rodeo. It's like the Super Bowl of rodeo. But I
Yep.
just emailed him. I said, "Hey, remember me, the Wheaties box guy? I still want to work for you. There's this rodeo thing coming up here in Vegas. Want to come to Vegas? I'll get you tickets to the rodeo." And all of a sudden he hit me back, said yes. I thought, oh shoot, now we got to get tickets. But I did, and he came to town. Anyway, the next day we had coffee, and he pitched me this whole idea for his new podcast, A Better Life with Brandon Turner. And my role,
Mm-hmm.
I am in charge of getting guests. So I'm our director of guest relations. I made that title up, but yeah, I'm in charge of getting guests. He basically said, "Hey, you were creepy enough to get me out to Vegas. You'll probably be creepy enough to get guests on a podcast." And so that's how that happened, and it's been an incredible experience ever since.
Between the idea of like pursuing something that could fit your expectations and goals and lifestyle needs versus sort of following your passion, at that spectrum, where does podcast fall underneath this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really haven't thought of. Number one, I love talking. So as you can tell, I talk a lot. But no, as far as my job goes, it's less of I'm passionate about my job and more I'm passionate about the people. You know, like I said, my job is to book podcast guests. I I'm not some crazy, like, addicted to podcast kinda guy. Like, you probably listen to more podcasts than me. The only reason I really listen to them is for my job to find potential guests and to learn and industry knowledge and stuff like that. But I'm passionate about the people in my business. I'm passionate about our mission. So a little bit about Better Life and in our podcast, A Better Life with Brandon Turner. So number one, first and foremost, I just need to put it out there that Brandon Turner, anybody who knows him, anybody who has listened to him, you think, wow, this is a pretty genuine guy. I like this guy. And you know what? In person, he is the exact same guy. He practices what he preaches. He's a man of God. He's a man of family. He's got his priorities in order. He works his butt off, and he's a really, really good, genuine leader. So that's number one. Is whenever you like who you're working for, uh, it's a whole lot easier. But number two, also, I meet some of the most incredible people in the world, and I'm very blessed for that. Like I said, my job is to get podcast guests, and so once we hook them, once we get the fish in the boat, then my job is to just be a resource for them, just help them. Just hey, we record all of our episodes at our studio in Maui, and so hey, if somebody needs hotel recommendations or help booking a flight or anything like that, hey, I'm your guy. I'm a resource for you. So I'm very blessed to literally my job is to make friends. So, and then third, and
Mm.
probably most importantly, Better Life is a nonprofit. And so he takes a $1 a year salary. And the amount of work this guy puts in is incredible. He takes a $1 a year salary and we give all of our profits to the fight against human trafficking, primarily to the Tim Tebow Foundation.
I'm really curious about like your role is a director of guest relations, and you mentioned about booking guests. And to me, because I do this podcast, it seems like a lot more than that. I think being making a podcast is it's a lot about creating a good experience for the guests. Uh, what are some of the key things that you do that would help you do your job well? or like what defines success in your role?
Yeah, I love that. It's a great question. So my role is funny. It's evolved a little bit and it's continually evolving because our industry is evolving constantly. It's pretty fast paced. But so my primary role is to get podcast guests. What that looks like and how we do that is I call it our core four approach. So basically, we've developed quite a few systems and processes. We have an objective scoring system. So anytime somebody applies to be on the podcast, or anytime I think somebody might be good, or Brandon thinks somebody might be good, we don't leave it up to chance. We have a formula that literally scores them and then kicks out a score, and that score basically says yes, this person should be on the podcast, or no, this person's probably not a fit. And now that's still kind of in the beta phase. And so it's trial and error. The idea is to match that up with what our listeners most want. And we define what our listeners most want by we look at downloads per episode and stuff like that. So, but anyway, our core four approach is once somebody's qualified, we then reach out to their handlers. We call, email, submit contact forms. We DM on social media. We leverage every relationship we can to try to get a hold of that person. And then once we finally book them, and like I said, we record all episodes in person at our studio in Maui. So there's quite a few logistics that go into that. It would make my job so much easier if we recorded remotely, but that's okay because doing it in person, it just makes for an incredible experience. Those artsy and creative skills oftentimes aren't coupled with the same skills of being systematic and process driven and stuff like that. So the other side of the coin, the other kind of role that I'm slowly taking on more and more is building out our systems and our processes and making sure that, hey, the second we click stop recording on this episode, making sure the link gets into the right hands, the right people at the right time, and they're following the right procedures and making sure we have all those procedures documented and in order to make sure that it all happens correctly and in a timely manner. So something I'm working on is, hey, how do we make all this replaceable? Um, how do we ensure that the company and the podcast is bigger than just one of us and it can run smoothly, plug and play. And it's never going to be entirely plug and play because life is about people and business is about people, and having great people is what makes a business run and be successful. But there's levels to it. And so that's a role I've been very grateful to take on, is be kind of our process czar a little bit, kind of be like our project manager.
I briefly did like a LinkedIn search, just like Brandon's like a better life, and it was like a company, and there were 40 employees, and I assume that kind of spread across like the marketing team, the production team, that across all the organizations and companies that he runs. But for the podcast specifically, like how does the team get set up?
Yeah, definitely. I say all this because it's a little bit of a spider web right now, right? We have a lot of the people that we need, and they're in the seats that they probably need to be in for the most part, but they're not. Those seats probably aren't in the right place, right? And so what this will look like a year from now is we will have, of course, Brandon's always at the top of the food chain. Then underneath him, we'll have like a project manager, or we'll have some kind of like brand manager, and that person's sole responsibility. And as I mentioned earlier, that's a role that I've taken on a little bit just as I'm kind of process and system driven. But in the
Yep.
future, this will be somebody whose sole responsibility is to manage the different pieces of the puzzle, to make sure that that content is getting to the right hands, to the right people, it's getting delivered appropriately, making sure that all the systems and processes are firing the way they're supposed to. It'll go Brandon, then it'll go kind of like a project manager. You can kind of think of that person as like a COO. And then underneath that project manager, we'll have the creative director, the director of guest relations, and then the social media director. And
Yep.
the underneath them, the audio and video editors will then report to either the social media director or the creative director. And then in a perfect world, I would have an associate of research, they call it. So basically, the Diary of CEO podcast has really transformed my role in terms of, hey, they're not just booking podcasts, they're booking podcast guests. They are researching podcast guests. And so their entire booking department they have a team of like 2 or 3 where they are vigorously, researching and diving deep into these people's backgrounds to see who's a fit and why. So that's the next evolution of my role and my kind of corner of the business as well, is getting super objective and data driven, so we can handpick exactly. It's not like, hey, let's book this podcast guest and hope it resonates with our audience. No. We know exactly, based on, different demographic materials and their background, if or if not they're going to resonate with our audience. So that's where we're at, and it's going to be the next evolution of it also.
That's awesome. When you spoke about like the research role, like it reminds me of like there's this podcast called Waveform by MKBHD. And he has a production team, one for research, one for editing, one for production, and one for the marketing or for the podcast specifically. So yeah, I think that's super extensive. I want to get a little bit more like tactical in terms of like, how do podcast hosts find guests? How do you get them on the podcast?
Yeah. All right. You want tactical? We're going to get tactical. We're going to get super crazy in the weeds. I hope that's okay. So I mentioned our core 4 approach, basically what that looks like. And a lot of this stuff maybe isn't going to make sense. If anybody wants to connect with me outside of this, happy to share more. Basically, we use an app called Airtable to manage our production, our flow. Everything we do in the podcast runs through this thing called Airtable. And so basically, once somebody is quote unquote qualified as a guest, and a record is created for them as a guest in our, what we call our targets table. That targets table is meant to be for me to go out and get that target, turn that target into a guest. So the initial status on that is qualification and project research. What that means is people are more likely to come on podcasts when they have something new coming out. So now that I say it, you're all going to realize it. But anytime somebody's releasing a book, or anytime somebody has a new movie coming out, or anytime somebody's starring in a new TV show that's set to be released, they go on this media blitz, right? So they're much more inclined to be on your podcast. They have something like that going out. So that's our first status, is project research. Do they have anything going on that we can leverage like that? And so after that, we move to the needs contact info status. What that is basically we scrape the internet for every piece of contact info we can find. We use 2 pieces of software for this rather than, we use Google and stuff like that. We find personal websites, contact forms. A lot of people do check their contact forms on their websites. It's a good resource. But we use 2 tools, one called bookingagentinfo.com. Basically what that is, every actor, every athlete, they all have agents and managers and publicists, right? All of their agents and managers and publicists info is on there for the most part. So we go to booking agent info and we put all that stuff into Airtable. The second software we use is called Apollo. So for the people out there who maybe aren't a big name, but as far as they're not an actor, or they don't have an agent or a manager, but they're entrepreneurs, Apollo will get super creepy and pull email addresses as far as like emails from the company. So you can look up by their company name and title. So you can find their email, and you can most likely find the email of their assistant or their podcast producer or whatever it is. So booking agent info and Apollo is how we do a deep dive into finding people's contact info. And then on really, really, really big guests, and we're slowly finding a way to do this systematically, but we will also mail something to them in the mail, kind of like how I mailed the Wheaties box to Brandon. We'll mail something to the mail, and we use county assessor websites for that. There's other, real estate centric websites that'll help you find addresses for people, mail-in addresses for people. So that's that. So after the needs contact info status, we move to the preliminary outreach status. The preliminary outreach status is the first 2 steps of our core 4 approach. Those first 2 steps are submit any contact forms we have and email anybody we have an email for. So if we have a personal email for them, we're going to do it that way. If we have their agent, manager, or publicist emails, we're going to email them. By the way, pro tip, publicists respond a whole lot more than agents and managers. So that's that. And then submitting contact forms, super simple. We'd like to submit it on behalf of Brandon and put his contact info in there. That way, if the guest does pick up the phone and call the phone number, they're not getting me, they're getting Brandon, and Brandon can talk to them about the actual show and stuff like that. That rarely happens, but we want to make sure that that's a resource, or we want to make sure that we're being authentic in that, so they know that Brandon is super hands on. So there's that. And then after the preliminary outreach, we move to secondary outreach. What secondary outreach is calling the agents, managers, and publicists, and then also DMing on Instagram. So what that looks like, calling is super simple. Most people don't pick up, but we leave a lot of voicemails. But after that is DMing on Instagram. Most of the time I'm DMing through my own Instagram, which is why it's super important for me to have a profile and an online presence that shows what I do, that I'm a stand-up person, yada yada, that I'm a good representative of the company. But other times we DM through Brandon's Instagram, and either we identify ourselves as, hey, this is so and so on Brandon's account, on behalf of Brandon, or we'll type up a message and we'll say, hey, Brandon, can you proof this and send it off so it is coming from him. So anyway, after that, we move up in the follow-up status. We always set a next touch point date in Airtable, meaning, hey, and we always leave comments in the little comment section of Airtable. So it says, hey, we went through our core 4 approach, didn't hear anything, but on February 12th, we're gonna reach out again via email to this person, whatever. So we always set a follow-up date. And then so after a bunch of back and forth, if we have gotten a hold of the person, we can book them. If not, we move them to what we call the back burner. Basically, the back burner is a catch-all for, hey, we weren't really able to get a hold of this person. Let's stay on the prowl for if they have any, projects coming out, like a new book or something like that, when we'll have a better chance to get a hold of them. But assuming we book them, basically a 25-point a checklist that happens. So as soon as we book them in Airtable, that's a trigger for an automation via Zapier and Airtable automations. So it sends calendar invites to them, calendar invites to our team. It creates different folders in Google Drive. It creates a show notes form. So we have a show notes template that we fill out before every episode. So that way Brandon is briefed on who this guest is, the questions to ask, stuff like that. So when it's time to fill that out, it's easy to fill it out. It also sends an automatic email to the guest saying, hey, please fill out this form with your bio and headshot and what you want to talk about, yada, yada, your birthday, your mailing address. Please fill this out within 7 days. It actually sends them another calendar invite to remind them 7 days after that's sent. And then it also creates a bunch of tasks in Asana. So our company also uses Asana for task and project management. And what those tasks look like is they all have specific due dates based on the record and publish date of the podcast. And what those look like is, hey, check in 48 hours before. Hey, share the content with them after it's recorded. Hey, triple check that they have the address. Hey, if they're coming to Maui, then send them our pre-vetted list of Maui recommendations as far as Airbnbs and hotels and flights and stuff like that, places to eat, whatever. And then it also, has a little thing. There's an automation, so it puts their birthday in my calendar. So much, and this is how I'll wrap this up. So much of my job, like I said, it's making friends and it's building relationships. And do you build a little bit of a relationship when you're booking a podcast guest and you're saying, come on the show, it'll be great for you, it'll be great for us, it'll be a win-win? Yeah, sure, that's fine, that's great. But you know how you really build relationships? You remember their birthday and you send them a Christmas card and you remember their kids' names and goofy, dumb stuff like that, that really, really, really matters in the long run. So that is how we book podcast guests. And then outside of all this, and I apologize to backtrack, but outside of all this, we are working on getting more and more proactive on going after projects first. And what I mean by that is, instead of saying, hey, Jocko Willink, noticed he has a new book coming out, let's reach out to him. We're trying to get in tight with all these different publishing houses. So Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, all of their different independent publicists. So that way, when they have their spring or summer catalog or fall catalog come out saying, hey, these are our new book releases we have, then we get that. It's 6 months in advance. and we can kind of pick and choose and say, hey, yeah, this person would be great. Do you mind connecting us with them? This person would be great. Do you mind connecting us with them? And what that does for us also, because we record all episodes in person, we need a little bit more lead time. And so a lot of times when you
Yep.
hear, like, it's December right now, it's early December.
Yep.
A lot of times people will, if they have a book coming out mid-January, then they'll start promoting it in early December. Well, that's not enough time for us to get somebody out to Maui on the podcast, record, and release in conjunction with the release of their book. So we need to get like 6 months out in advance with them. So that's how we do it,
Wow,
is getting in
6
bed with those
months.
publicists. And I know that's a lot, and I know it's probably super overwhelming for people, but I would encourage folks to just start by being organized and reaching out to people, but keeping track of their communication. And once you book someone, keeping track of who they're friends with and building a serious relationship with them, because probably 50% of our podcast guests have come from this systematic outreach, and it's me, and it's not even 50%, probably 30 or 40% have come from this. But the other, 60 to 70% have just come from Brandon's friends. It's come from the relationships that he has built over the years. So that really is where the magic happens. But
Like every minute of that was just like gold. Like as a podcaster, like I learned so much about the process between discovering the creator, qualifying the creator, and like actually like getting onto the podcast before you hit the record button, because there's so much that goes within it from the get go, like making sure you keep in loop of like any kind of events that are happening on the guest side, whether it was like a book that was about to get released, and to the latter point you made about like going less from like the person side but to the publisher side. I think that's also really interesting because media it's competitive, but I think it's a positive sum game, right? Like when you think about like Penguin House, like they are also incentivized to promote their artists, to incentivize to promote their authors. So then the idea of being able to connect Brandon and their individual authors also provide value to everyone. Provide value to Brandon, so our audience or your audience were able to hear from great perspective from great authors, to learn about great books. I think that's fantastic, man. This is so cool. And you mentioned a little bit about like the time element too. Like let's say if a book gets published in January, they're gonna start promoting it in December, and you said you're probably gonna book out the podcast 6 months in advance because like running a podcast it's a lot about organization and making sure like you're able to upload consistently, right? Yeah, can you maybe walk me through? I know it varies a lot, but like from your experience, what does the timeline look from identifying the guest to like reaching out to the guest to recording to the pod to publishing?
yeah, the timeline is different, and it definitely varies a ton. But what it kind of looks like on our end, because Brandon has other companies, he's got other commitments, right? And so I have to work closely with his assistant on finding dates where he's available for the podcast, right? And so basically, what we do is we have a calendar where we say, hey, Brandon is available on this date, and this date, and we do that, about 4 to 5 months in advance. That way we can book that far out if we absolutely need to. Now, so currently we're booked out way out. We're currently booked about 6 months in advance. So if we record an episode tomorrow, we won't release it until about June. But that's not really where we want to be, because it's very time relevant. Because we're a new show, what we've done is we've kind of built up a little bit of a backlog of cushion, right? And those are episodes that
Yep.
aren't super time relevant. And we have prefaced it with those guests saying, hey, we're not sure when this will come out, but it'll come out eventually. We really appreciate you being on the show. And so anyway, yeah, that's how we get around the whole, hey, make sure we have enough cushion being a new show and this and that. But what it'll actually look like is, and it varies depending on guests, because like when we recorded with Tim Tebow, so we had him on the podcast, we wanted to get that out ASAP because he was also speaking at one of our events. And so we recorded it, and in 5 days, we had that thing released with social content and everything. It was ready to go. Now, in reality, our team probably needs about 14 days to comfortably get everything done. But then outside of that, as far as if we record an episode tomorrow and it's a fairly bigger guest, it's not like a cushion type of guest or type of episode, that'll come out about, 2 months from now. Only
Mm,
based on whether or not, I'm doing a good job of my job. I look at my job as quality and quantity. So if the quantity side of my job is doing well, then it'll be released in about 2 months. And why it's 2 months is because the way it works out, like I said, we take one recording trip, we call them, per quarter. And so I like to be booked out 1 quarter in advance. That way, if worst comes to worst, and absolutely we can get nobody to come to Maui to record an episode in the next 3 months, that's okay. We'll be good. We'll have that gap bridged until our next recording trip when we go to them, because it's so much easier to convince somebody, hey, we're recording a podcast in your backyard. Do you want to be on? Rather than, hey, do you want to fly across half of the Pacific Ocean to be on the podcast? Now, we're proud and blessed to have a great studio out in Maui, and it's Maui, so people want to come out there, which is kind of fun.
it's a great
So
place
it's
to
not
be.
that hard of a sell, but it is tough to fit in people's schedules. So yeah, we like to be booked out about 2 to 3 months in advance.
That sounds pretty reasonable. That I think that is also the goal that I wanted to pursue. Like that's the time frame that I want to personally pursue as well, because it gives you enough of a cushion to maybe take a small break, or if anything happens to your personal life, then you can kind of sort of make space for that. But at the same time, like not being like 6, 7 months out in advance, where like you kind of lose that like time sensitivity. And I know like Brandon's podcast, it's like huge. It's one of the top 50 podcasts in America. And I'm curious, when you spoke about like the scheduling, the timeline, does his monetization, or like the ad inventory kind of play a role into your scheduling decisions, or does it kind of play independently?
Yeah, so we are early on in our monetization of the podcast, and why that's kind of been on the back burner is a couple reasons. Number one is I mentioned earlier, the Better Life Tribe is a nonprofit, but the podcast is also. So where the Better Life Tribe donates all their money to the fight against human trafficking, we donate all of our money to a charity of each guest's choosing, which is super fun. It's not much. It's a few $1,000s each episode, but it's fun to be able to say in the middle of every episode, Brandon says, hey, Alex, we're about to run the ad, but before we run the ad, what breaks your heart? Where's this money going to be going today? And Alex, you're able to plug your favorite charity, kind of, share a little bit about what they do, their mission, this and that. And then we run the ad. So it incentivizes,
Mm,
one, listeners are more incentivized to actually listen to the ad. Number two, guests, they are more incentivized to come on the podcast and then share the clips from the podcast, because the more downloads we get, the more money we'll make for their charity. So it's totally a win-win. Now with that, monetization, we are primarily floated monetarily by the money that we make elsewhere in the business. Podcasting, I don't care how big of a podcast you are, you're not making a ton of money until Spotify buys you out. You can make some money. You certainly can. The Diary of a CEO, I think they said they made like between $1 and $2 million last year, which is incredible. But until Spotify buys you out like Joe Rogan, you're not going to be making crazy, crazy money. And so we use those ad spots primarily right now to promote the Better Life Tribe, which is the other side of our company, or Better Life Ref, which is Brandon's real estate funding company, or other things like that. Now we have a couple early advertisers, and shameless plug, if anybody out there does want to advertise, we are taking advertisers on. It's an incredible opportunity. But in terms of the timeliness, we like to do live ad reads. So that's something we're working through right now. Yeah, you're right. If somebody buys an ad and we are doing the ad live in the episode, but that episode's not going to air for 4 or 5 months, well, that's not going to fly. So we're working through how
Yep.
do we do those live ad reads and still get them out in a timely manner? Or do we do the traditional drop in an ad, and then that's easy, and then we can insert whatever ad into whatever episode, right? So it's it's kind of a game of prioritization, and we're getting there, and we're not sure what that answer is yet, but we're figuring it out.
That's like super interesting to hear from your perspective. Like, I think when I think about like scheduling and monetization, like the timing of like when episodes comes up, like there are so many stakeholders from like the guest, the audience, the ad, even yourself from the production perspective. Like there's so many like factors and considerations you have to think about. It's really starting to become like a huge role in your life, and I'm just curious for you as a person, like someone who's super entrepreneurial, someone who wanted to create, someone who's very family oriented, very faith oriented, very fitness oriented. You just did Ironman, and I think it was like a Navy SEAL training exercise as well. Like I'm curious, what does success look like to you?
Oh man, that's a loaded question, brother. I love that. I'll answer that two ways. Right now, I'm slowly working on building my own personal brand, right? I think we all see the value, especially if you're listening to this podcast, you understand the value of having a personal brand. And that personal brand doesn't have to be, hey, I have millions of followers and I have this huge massive podcast and this and that. But what that brand is, I would encourage anybody to read the book Brand You by Tom Peters. It's an oldie but a goodie. And that'll give everybody a good idea of like what branding truly is, as far as when you walk in a room or when somebody thinks about you or when somebody's writing to you or when somebody receives an email from you, what are they seeing and what does that say to them? It's not what you say, it's what people hear. And so that is what branding truly is. So I'm slowly working on my own personal branding and getting more and more intentional and out front about that. Now, second, I have 5 priorities in life: my faith, my family, my fitness, my finances, and my future. If something falls outside of that, then odds are I want absolutely nothing to do with it. Faith, God comes first, second, and third. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Jesus is everything. Second, my family. That's my flesh and blood. Do anything for them. My fitness. The story goes there was a billionaire. He was on his deathbed, and he was trying to, use every new kind of medicine and procedure and had every famous doctor in the world working on him, but he couldn't buy his health. And so that's why fitness and wellness is so important. Then after finances, we live in a tangible world where finances matter. And if you're serious about providing your family and designing your life in the way that you want, then you have to get serious about your finances. That doesn't mean that you got to go have 12 super yachts. It just means you have to have goals and you have to set game plans to set those goals. And then fifth is future. And what that means is, one, it's a catch-all for other kind of self-improvement type stuff, reading books and this and that, but also it's a framework for life. And so I live by, or I'm trying to be super systematic and have kind of a workflow of the priorities in my life. And where I stole this from was a book called The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. They call it goal setting to the now. So basically what it is you set a 5-year vision for your life. And that vision, for me, I set a vision for each of the 5 different areas of my life: my faith, family, fitness, finances, and future. We take that 5-year vision, we reverse engineer every single year to that 5-year vision. You have an annual benchmark. And then every quarter within that, you set a different goal within your faith, family, finances, and future. Now, some of those goals, I know 5 goals a quarter is a lot. So I like to encourage people, hey, set 1 or 2 stretch goals and then make the other 3 or 4, a little bit more manageable, a little bit more like maintenance type goals. So an example, one of my maintenance goals this quarter was to get coffee with my dad 3 times. That's pretty simple. And so what I did when I set that goal is I texted my dad. I said, hey, Dad, this is my goal for the quarter. Let's set dates right now. And we did it and done.
I love it. I love how you describe success so confidently, so concretely with like a set of systems and principles. Like it wasn't it doesn't look like, oh, okay, I'm gonna accomplish X, Y, Z and accomplish like A, B, C. It's more about like I have these 5 principles and things that I value in my life. For every episode, I like to ask my guests to leave the audience a little challenge. Like for those people who are like tuning in, if you have to give them a little challenge, I guess for 2024, like what would you suggest?
But I'm gonna really, really challenge people here. I will be doing the 4x4x48 challenge. It was made famous by a guy named David Goggins. He's a former Navy SEAL. What it is you run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours straight. So you start at midnight, you run 4 miles. And then at 4 a.m., 8 a.m., noon, 4 p.m., all the way through 48 hours straight, you run 4 miles every single time. Basically, anybody can run 4 miles. And by the way, you don't even have to run it. You can walk it. Basically anybody can do this, but it's going to be so mentally and emotionally and even spiritually taxing. So that is my challenge because that's my current physical challenge. I love physical challenges. I don't think there's any better way to reveal what's truly going on and where your heart and your headspace truly is than through putting your body, beating your body. And if anybody's in Vegas and they want to do the 4x4x48, let's go. I'm in. Come on, call me. I will literally do it with you.
That's awesome, man. I guess for the viewers, 4x4x48 might be a little bit too much, but I think the idea of just like go out there and physically challenge yourself.
Oh, thank you. And Alex, by the way, I'm putting together, so I told you I ran a marathon. I'm documenting slowly. I'm not sure when I'll be ready, but I'm documenting my training that I did for that marathon. I'm going to put it out there in the form of a free resource. I want to be a resource for people who do want to take up physical, hard challenges like that. So literally, I'm going to put out a free training guide for a marathon here soon. Anybody can find it. It'll be ready here in the next couple weeks. So that'll be available for anybody too.
Sounds great. All the resources, including the books, that Stetson mentioned, Stetson's social media profiles will all be linked in the description. And again, thank you, like to Stetson, so much for taking the time to share with us. So appreciate you for coming on, and yeah, looking forward to connect again for the next episode.
Alex, thank you, brother. Cannot be more grateful. Have a great rest of your day. Everybody out there, thank you for listening. Alex, you're the man. Talk to you soon.
So that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. All the links and resources will be shared in the descriptions. And if you'd like to support the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating on whichever platform that you're on. It would help us a ton to reach new audiences. Thank you so much for listening. And again, I see you in the next one.